they called my backyard engagement party a joke. Not behind my back, to my face, with wine in their hands and smiles that didn't reach their eyes. My mother-in-law looked around at the string lights my fiancé Ethan and I had spent 2 weekends hanging ourselves. At the folding tables my aunt helped us cover with linen. At the grocery store's cake we decorated with fresh lavender from my mother's garden. And she said, loud enough for 12 people to hear, "Well, it's quaint." She said it the way people say interesting when they mean ugly. That was 18 months ago. I have replayed that moment more times than I can count. Not because it hurt, though it did, deeply, but because of what it made me realize. I had spent 3 years trying to be accepted by a family that had already decided I wasn't worth the effort, and I had let them. My name is Sylvie. I'm 31 years old. I grew up in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, in a house where we left our boots at the door and kept a jar of change on the counter for the food bank. My parents weren't wealthy. My father drove a delivery truck for 22 years. My mother cleaned houses 3 days a week and made the best pierogies I have ever tasted in my life. They were not fancy people, but they were good, the kind of good that doesn't need to announce itself. Ethan's family was different. His father ran a commercial real estate development company based out of Toronto. His mother sat on the boards of 2 charitable organizations and spent her winters in Palm Springs. They had a cottage on Lake Muskoka with a boathouse larger than the house I grew up in. The first time Ethan brought me to a family dinner, I wore the wrong thing. I didn't know that. I just knew everyone's eyes moved over me once and then away, the way you glance at something that doesn't interest you. His mother, Renata, never said anything directly unkind. That was her skill. She operated in the space between words. The pause before she answered a question, the tilt of her head when I talked about my job, the way she asked about my family with an expression that looked like concern but felt like pity. She was fluent in a language I didn't speak and didn't want to learn. Ethan loved me. I believe that completely, but he loved his family too, and he had spent 34 years learning to smooth things over, to translate tension into something acceptable, to stand in the middle and make everyone comfortable. He was very good at it. Sometimes I wondered if that was part of why he chose me. I was easy to manage, I didn't make scenes, I apologized quickly. I laughed things off, I laughed off the engagement party comment. I watched Renata carry her wine glass across my aunt's backyard like she was doing us a favor by being there, and I laughed, and I refilled her glass, and I introduced her to my parents like I was proud of everyone in that yard, which I was. I just wasn't sure she deserved to be there. The comment I couldn't laugh off came 2 weeks later. Ethan's older brother, Fletcher, sent a group text to the family, one that Ethan was part of and that Ethan showed me later, face tight, not knowing what to do with it. Fletcher had written, "Ethan finally locked it down lol. Guess everyone has a type." He always did like projects. I read it 3 times. Then I handed Ethan back his phone and walked into our bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub for a long time. I wasn't crying, I was calculating. I was adding up everything I had absorbed over 3 years and realizing I had been treating each incident like it was individual. A one-off, a misunderstanding, a bad day. I had not been looking at the pattern. Looking at the pattern now, I felt something settle in my chest. Not defeat, closer to clarity. I saved a screenshot of that text. I did not tell Ethan what I was going to do with it. I wasn't sure yet myself. We had set a wedding date, June, the following year, here in Ontario. Ethan wanted to get married in Muskoka at his family's cottage. I had said yes without thinking about it carefully enough. When I thought about it carefully, which I started doing, in those weeks after the group text, I realized I didn't want to get married in a place where I would always feel like a guest. I wanted to get married somewhere that felt like mine. I brought it up on a Thursday night. Ethan was making pasta. I told him I'd been thinking about the venue and I wanted to talk about it. He listened. He said Muskoka was important to his family. I said I understood that, but it was our wedding, and I wanted somewhere that felt like it belonged to both of us. We talked for 2 hours, it didn't resolve cleanly. But he heard me. That was the thing about Ethan. When he was actually listening, really listening, he was good at it. He agreed to look at other options. He said we'd figure it out together. I think he meant it. What I didn't tell him was that I had started looking at other options already. Specifically, I had started spending my lunch breaks reading about venues in British Columbia, because I'd had an idea I wasn't ready to say out loud yet. An idea that had nothing to do with the wedding and everything to do with what I was going to do after it. I need to back up. I have a degree in computer science from the University of Saskatchewan. After graduation, I took a job with a mid-sized software firm in Waterloo, Ontario, which is how I ended up in this province. which is how I ended up meeting Ethan at a work function. He was there for a client of his father's company. I spent 6 years at that firm. I was good at my job. I knew I was good at my job. But the particular type of good I was, precise, quiet, fast, wasn't the type that got noticed. While I was working there, in my own time, I had been building something, a platform. It started as a tool I made for myself to manage freelance contracts and invoice tracking, because the software available was either too expensive or too clunky or both. I built something cleaner. Then I showed it to a friend who did contract work, and she wanted to use it. Then she showed 2 other people, and they wanted to use it. By the time Ethan and I got engaged, I had 400 users and had stopped telling people about it, because I was afraid of growing faster than I could handle. I had not told Renata any of this. I had not told Fletcher. I had not frankly told Ethan the full picture. I'd mentioned it as a side project, a hobby, something I was playing around with. That was partly because I didn't want to jinx it. Partly because I had learned, slowly, that there was safety in being underestimated. I kept adding, I kept refining. I had connected through a mutual contact with a product strategist named Vera who had taken one look at what I'd built and asked if I'd considered institutional clients. I had not. She had. We started talking seriously in January. By March, we had a partnership agreement signed. By April, we had our first B2B contract, a mid-sized accounting firm in Calgary, 47 users, 12-month commitment. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a Shoppers Drug Mart reading the signed contract on my phone when I started crying. Not sad crying, the other kind. The kind that surprises you. I drove home and made dinner and didn't say anything to Ethan about it. I needed to hold it by myself for a while. The wedding planning was happening in parallel to all of this, and it was its own particular experience. Renata had opinions. She expressed them through Ethan, usually a relay system, so that by the time feedback reached me, it had been softened enough to be technically deniable. The flowers I wanted were a bit casual, don't you think? The photographer I'd chosen was not who the family usually uses. The guest list ratio, more of my people than his because his family was smaller, was a bit unbalanced. I nodded at all of it. I made notes. I changed nothing. What I changed was the venue. Ethan and I had reached an agreement. We would get married in the Okanagan Valley, in British Columbia, at a vineyard. It was neutral ground, not Muskoka, not Saskatchewan. Somewhere that belonged to both of us equally because it belonged to neither of us originally. Ethan's family was politely unhappy about it. My family was delighted because a trip to BC felt like an adventure, and my parents had never been wine touring. Renata called me directly, which she rarely did, to say she thought it was a shame we weren't using the cottage. She said the cottage had been in the family for 3 generations. I said I understood, and that it was a beautiful property, and that we were really excited about the vineyard. Then she said, "I hope your guests will be comfortable with the travel. I know it's a long way for people who don't fly much. People who don't fly much." I thanked her for her concern and got off the phone and sat very still for about 45 seconds. Then I texted Vera. Vera had been asking gently and then less gently whether I was ready to talk about the next step. We had 16 B2B clients now. We had, quietly, been approached by a venture capital firm based in Vancouver. A preliminary conversation, nothing signed but real. They wanted to understand the trajectory. They wanted to know what I was thinking about scale. I had been thinking about scale constantly. I had not been ready to say so. I texted Vera, "Let's set up the call." The VC meeting happened over video. Myself, Vera, and 2 partners from the firm, one in Vancouver, one calling in from Montreal. It went for 90 minutes. At the end, they asked to see our financials and user data. I sent everything that night. Within a week, they had come back with a term sheet. I stared at the number for a long time. It was not $24 billion. I want to be accurate here. I am not a billionaire. What it was, what the valuation implied, given the investment and the equity split, was that the thing I had built in my off hours over 4 years, starting as a tool to manage my own invoices, was now worth 8 figures. Canadian. I was 30 years old. I was 3 months away from my wedding. And I had just quietly become the founder of a company being valued at just over $40 million. I called my mother first, she cried. My father got on the line and his voice was very careful and proud, the way it gets when he's trying not to cry also. I told them not to tell anyone yet, not until after the wedding. I didn't want it to become a thing. I didn't want to spend my engagement being asked about it by people who had no idea what I'd been building for 4 years. Ethan, I told Ethan that night. I sat him down and I walked him through everything. The platform, the growth, Vera, the VC firm, the term sheet. He was quiet for a long time, then he said, "Sylvie, why didn't you tell me sooner?" And I said, honestly, because I wasn't sure this family valued things I built. I was afraid it would get dismissed. And I wasn't ready for that. He didn't say anything to that. He pulled me in and held on for a while. I think it landed somewhere it needed to land. He asked if he could tell his family. I said, after the wedding. He agreed. To his credit, he kept it. The wedding was in June, in the Okanagan. The vineyard was gold and green in that particular way the valley gets in early summer. The hills rolling behind the rows of vines, the sky so blue it looked almost artificial. We had 112 guests. My parents were in the front row. My mother wore a dress she'd found at a consignment shop in Saskatoon, and it was perfect on her, and she looked beautiful, and I told her that right before I walked. Renata wore a hat, a large hat. She told 3 different people that I know of that she found the travel exhausting. Fletcher gave a toast that was technically warm and actually about himself. His wife laughed at the right moments. I smiled through all of it. Ethan's vows made me cry. Mine apparently made several people cry, including my father and Vera, who was sitting in the 5th row and had not expected to be affected. We danced to a song we'd argued about choosing for 6 weeks, and it was worth every minute of the argument. That night, after the reception, when Ethan and I were finally alone in the suite, I thought about saying it then, the thing I had been holding. But I didn't. The day was complete as it was. I told him on the flight home. We were somewhere over the Rockies. I said, I think we should talk about what comes next. He said, the honeymoon? I said, after that, the company. What I want to do now that we're past the wedding. I've been offered a seat at the table and I want to take it. He looked at me for a moment and then he smiled, this specific smile he has that's part proud and part something like wonder, and he said, tell me everything. 3 weeks after we landed back in Ontario, the funding closed. Vera and I signed the final documents in a boardroom in downtown Toronto on a Tuesday afternoon. She brought sparkling water and small macarons from a bakery on King Street. We toasted with the sparkling water because neither of us drinks much, and that seemed right. That evening, Ethan and I had dinner with his parents. It was something they'd requested, a welcome home dinner, Renata's idea. We went to a restaurant in Yorkville, the kind of place where the menu doesn't list prices and the lighting is designed to make everyone look expensive. Fletcher was there with his wife. Ethan's father, Bernard, was at the head of the table. Renata was already seated when we arrived, already halfway through her first glass of wine. Bernard asked about the honeymoon. We told them about Porto. He nodded approvingly. Porto was acceptable. Fletcher's wife asked about the wedding photos. Had we seen them yet? We had, and they were beautiful, and I said so without mentioning that Fletcher's toast had not made the edit we'd shared with family. Then Bernard turned to me, and this was unusual. Bernard did not often address me directly and said, so Sylvie, what's next for you? Still at the software firm? I had left the software firm in February to work on the platform full-time. I had not announced this to Ethan's family. I had simply done it. I said, no, actually. I stepped away from that position earlier this year. I've been running my own company. Bernard raised his eyebrows, not unkindly, but with that particular brand of interest reserved for surprising information. Is that right? What kind of company? I explained the platform briefly. B2B contract management software, targeting small to mid-sized professional service firms. We'd grown to 63 enterprise clients. We'd closed a Series A, Fletcher said from across the table. A Series A, how much? I looked at him. I thought about the group text. He always did like projects. I said, enough to take the next step seriously. He pressed. Fletcher always pressed. Ballpark? I said, I'd rather not discuss the specifics at dinner. Renata, who had been watching this exchange with an expression I couldn't entirely read, said, that's very exciting, Sylvie. I had no idea you were so entrepreneurial. She said it the way she said Quaint about the string lights, like it was a minor charming hobby, like I had started selling jam at a farmer's market. I said, I know. I kept it close for a while. I didn't want the attention until there was something real to show. Bernard said, well, that's smart actually. Keep things quiet until you've got traction. That's how the real ones do it. He looked at Fletcher when he said it. I noticed, I said nothing. On the drive home, Ethan reached over and held my hand. He said, you held that beautifully. I said, I've had practice. He knew what I meant. 2 months later, the Toronto Business Press ran a piece on the funding round. It wasn't a big piece, a few paragraphs, my name, Vera's name, the firm's name, a quote from one of the VC partners about the market opportunity. I had known it was coming. I had not warned Ethan's family. The first call came from Bernard. He said he hadn't realized the scale of what I'd been working on. He said he was very impressed. He mentioned, with what I think he considered subtlety, that the company's growth strategy sounded interesting and that he had connections in commercial real estate who might benefit from a tool like mine if I was ever looking for referrals. I thanked him warmly. I said I'd think about it. Fletcher texted Ethan, not me. He still couldn't quite bring himself to contact me directly. Ethan showed me the message. Your wife is kind of a big deal, had no idea. Good on her. Ethan texted back, she's been building it for 4 years, we're proud. He showed me his reply before he sent it. The we. The call I hadn't expected came from Renata on a Saturday morning. She called my number this time, not Ethan's. She was warm in a way she had not been with me before, fuller, less edited. She said she had read the article and she wanted me to know how genuinely proud she was. She said she wished she had known sooner, that she might have been able to help, that she had some connections at a local business accelerator that might have been useful earlier in the process. Earlier in the process, when I was playing around with a side project and didn't need to be taken seriously. I said, that's very kind. We managed to put together a really solid team. She said, of course you did. Then, carefully, I hope you know we always believed in you, Sylvie, from the very beginning. I held the phone. I thought about the engagement party. It's quaint. I thought about people who don't fly much. I thought about sitting on the edge of the tub, very still, adding up a pattern. I said, I appreciate you saying that, Renata. I did not say I have a screenshot of your son calling me a project. I did not say, you never asked me once what I was working on. I did not say any of the things that would have made me feel briefly satisfied and then quietly ashamed. I had learned by then that there is a version of winning that requires you to stay completely, perfectly calm, that the best response to people who bet against you is not anger. It is simply to keep building and let the numbers speak. We were added to Renata and Bernard's annual Christmas card list that year. A real card with a family photo hand-addressed. It arrived in December, our names printed neatly on the envelope. I put it on the fridge. Every time I looked at it, I thought about the string lights in my aunt's backyard and the grocery store cake with lavender on top. I thought about my mother in her consignment shop dress and my father's voice going careful and proud on the phone. I thought about the parking lot outside the Shoppers, the signed contract on my phone screen, the crying that surprised me. There is a particular satisfaction in building something real and quiet and good, and then watching people who underestimated you adjust their understanding. They don't always say sorry. Often they skip that part entirely and go straight to being interested, being warm, being suddenly very supportive. You have to decide if you want to accept that, the revised version of them, with no acknowledgement of the original. I decided I could. Not because I forgot, and not because it didn't matter, but because I had something better to put my energy toward. Vera and I are in the middle of our Series B conversations now. I spend most of my working hours in a state of productive overwhelm that I have come to understand is just what growth feels like from the inside. Ethan quit his job last year to help with operations, his idea, not mine, and he is excellent at it. My mother calls every Sunday. She asks about the company and about whether I'm eating enough, and about whether Ethan and I have thought about getting a dog. We have not gotten a dog yet. We are still thinking about it. My father drove a delivery truck for 22 years. He retired in the spring. I was able to help with that. When Renata asks about the company now, and she does ask, regularly, with genuine curiosity, I answer fully. I show her the same respect I would give anyone who asks good questions and listens to the answers. I do not perform warmth I do not feel, but I do not withhold warmth I do. It's a kind of honesty that takes some practice. The last time we were all together, at Christmas at the cottage, which is still large, still beautiful, still a bit of a statement, Fletcher pulled me aside before dinner. He said, I want to apologize for things I said earlier, before the wedding. I was an ass. He didn't specify, I didn't make him. I said, I appreciate that, Fletcher. He nodded, looking relieved. Then he said, can I ask you something? The platform, are you hiring? Because I have a friend who's looking to pivot into tech and I thought maybe. I smiled. I said, send me his resume. He would probably be a terrible fit, but I said it. On the drive back to Toronto that night, Ethan was quiet for a while, and then he said, you know you didn't have to do that. I said, I know. He said, why did you? I looked at the highway lights going past, the dark fields on either side, the enormous ordinary darkness of the country at night, that I have always found beautiful, that I grew up inside of, that no amount of money or Yorkville restaurants changes anything about. I said, because it costs me nothing, and I'd rather be the person who doesn't need to hold it. He reached over and held my hand on the console between us. Neither of us said anything else for a long time. The highway stretched out ahead, and I drove us home.